Oh, sorry. Okay, I think my mic is on now. I apologize. Right, can you hear me now, everyone? Okay, super. So we're gonna get going. Let me get this screen kind of put into presentation mode, and then we should be able to get started. All right. So this is the Iowa State University's Office of Student Financial Aid's presentation. My name is Jim Schreitmuller, and I'm an advisor here in the office. And today we are going to be presenting on paying for college. So today we'll kind of talk about reviewing your aid offer, using the expense estimator tool, and additional options to help pay for college. So the presentation agenda today will be covering the following topics and activities. Finding the student financial aid offer in Workday and determining your remaining financial aid eligibility, so kind of how much you can borrow. Using the expense estimator to find how much to borrow. Your additional loan options outside of Iowa State. We'll do a live demonstration of the expense estimator tool together after going over it kind of as a presentation. I'll talk briefly about the Teach Grant, which is an additional aid option for education students. And then finally, we'll have room for any questions. All right. So getting started, kind of the way I like to think about it is there's kind of three questions. How much can I borrow? So that's what we'll use the financial aid offer to determine. How much you can borrow before hitting what's known as the cost of attendance, aka your financial aid limit. How much do I need to borrow? That's when we'll use the expense estimator along with your financial aid offer to determine how much of the university bill is going to be covered by your current financial aid. And then finally, how do I borrow? Reviewing the Parent Plus and private student loan options, as well as how to apply for them. All right. So kind of with that, how much can I borrow question. First things first, we'll need to find your financial aid offer. This can be found in Workday. This is kind of the student's view. So I don't quite know how to do this as a parent with third-party access, but this is how your student would be able to find their aid offer in Workday. First things first, they will want to click on that menu button in the upper left-hand corner of the Workday homepage. Next, they would want to click on My Financial Aid um, as an option. And then finally, they would click on View Financial Aid on that right-hand side. Um, Outside of this, then once you get there, they will click on the 25-26 award year option and hit OK. Once they do this, they will scroll the page down to the 25-26 award year summary section of the View Financial Aid page. And kind of on this section, you'd be able to see the 2025-2026 award year summary. You'll want to click on Print Financial Aid Offer to get a PDF of that aid offer letter. And then below that is an awards breakdown, kind of breaking it down semester by semester with individual types of aid. So that can be helpful, but it's not really what we're going to be covering during today's presentation. So kind of how much can I borrow the financial aid letter? So this is what the financial aid letter looks like. This is the first page. Um, it's kind of split into different sections. The section I'm going to be talking about right now is that estimated total cost of attendance, or I'll call it COA. The cost of attendance is used to determine the limit of how much financial aid a student can receive per semester per year. And our office has to determine this amount uh, is required by law. The amounts are determined based off the estimated cost for an average student with your student situation. So how much would an average student pay with your student's major, class standing, and residency status? So we can see this student is going to be paying right around 30,000 in tuition and fees, a little bit under 11,000 for housing and food, and then it's estimated they'll pay around $800 for books, course materials, supplies, and equipment. It also considers kind of average expenses for a student. So transportation expenses is $900 for the year. That may or may not be the case with your student, depending on where they live, as well as personal expenses. And those can, vary wildly between students. That's why it's just kind of a general estimate. The term cost of attendance is a pretty tricky one, since these are just your estimated costs, and they are not necessarily what would be reflected on your U bill. So this student's estimated cost of attendance is $45,300. Really what this means is they can't receive more than $45,300 in financial aid, any combination of loans, grants, scholarships for the 2025-2026 school year. So even in a case if, say, this student was receiving like $60,000 in scholarships, we wouldn't be able to give them the entire $60,000 since it exceeds the cost of attendance. We'd have to return some just to reduce it down to $45,300. But ultimately, that'd be a pretty good problem to have. Next are your financial aid options to cover estimated costs. This section of the letter summarizes the yearly amounts of grants, scholarships, and other aid available. Most importantly, it tells us that our additional PLUS loan or private loan eligibility is at $28,075. On this next slide, we will kind of examine this section in a bit more detail. So this first part, grants and scholarships, just covers grants and scholarships. This is free money that doesn't have to be paid back. The next section is federal student loans. This represents the eligibility that your student has for federal loans they can take out if they have completed the FAFSA. They will still need to accept these in Workday and complete any prerequisites for them for the loans to actually go out and apply towards the university bill. And then at the bottom, we have employment options or work study. Not every student will have these who has completed a FAFSA. This kind of depends on your financial need and if the FAFSA was filed before our priority aid deadline back in last February. This section is also a placeholder amount for any work study earnings. Work study is also a bit tricky since it isn't applied as a lump sum, but rather is money that would be earned by your student on a biweekly basis. If they had a work study position on campus, they would just get paid like any other job on campus. But we do have to include it on the aid offer because part of their funds are paid by federal funds, part of their wages, which means we have to include it as financial aid. So when determining the remaining cost of attendance eligibility, we have to count it against it, but we won't include it when we are using the expense estimator. Hopefully it makes a bit more sense on this next screen. We'll kind of take a look at everything. So we can see that our eligibility for additional loans is $28,075. But how did we arrive at that number? Basically, we start at that $45,300 cost of attendance limit, and then we subtract away any financial aid, which kind of takes up part of this pie. So we subtract out $8,525 for the grants and scholarships, subtract out $5,500 for the federal student loan eligibility, and we also subtract out $3,200 for possible work study earnings. Subtracting these out leaves us with the remaining slice of what's remaining of the cost of attendance, which is basically $28,700 is what we can take out without going over that COA limit. As a tip, real quick, if your student has work study eligibility but isn't planning on working in a work study position on campus, the student can contact our office and request that the work study placeholder amount is removed or possibly reduced for the semester to create more room for additional loan eligibility. But that's something they'd have to request and that our office does for them to kind of get you that additional loan eligibility. So now that we know how much we can borrow, how much do we need to borrow? We can use the expense estimator tool to figure out how much we need to borrow now. So if you go to our homepage, financialaid.iastate.edu, we can find it by doing the following. One, click on that getting started kind of drop-down option on our top bar, navigation bar in our web homepage. And then in that drop-down, click on the estimating cost option. That'll take you to our estimating cost landing page. And then click on that third option, expense estimator, to take us to the expense estimator. Once you're there, you will enter information that reflects your student's residency status, number of credits. So if they're a full-time student, it's likely 12 or more, and then academic classification status. Basically, are they a first-year student, sophomore, junior, senior, whatever. And then finally, their area of study. For most students, it will probably just say like standard undergraduate. In the next section, you would enter their housing and meal plan information. So if they're living on campus, put their residence hall, the type of room they're going to be at, room feature, if it has AC or anything extra like that, and then finally what meal plan they've selected. If they're off campus, you can select off campus housing, and then under meal plan, select either whatever meal plan you are choosing or select no meal plan. Finally, you'll enter in any additional costs. So for sure, you'll put in books for the amount of $520, which kind of reflects the 260 immediate access one book fee over both semesters for fall and spring. But since this current estimator on our website is using numbers from the 24-25 academic year, you'll need to add an additional adjustment to help bring the estimator up to 25-26 amounts. Hopefully you won't have to do this for long, because hopefully by the end of July, we will have our updated expense estimator ready and available on our website. But an average estimated amount that you need to add for a student living on campus with a meal plan is roughly about $1,000 for an in-state student or $2,000 a year for an out-of-state student, just to kind of adjust for changes in expenses for the meal plan, on-campus housing, and tuition and fees changes. Finally, we will put in our aid information from our aid offer letter. So you'll enter in the student's aid based off of the letter. But if you have any work study amounts on the offer, make sure to leave them off the estimator. So you can see I put in 8,100 for, I put it for the Pell Grant, but it should be the ISU grant, but that doesn't really matter for the expense estimator. I put in 425 for their non-ISU scholarships, and then I included the $3,500 and $2,000 of subsidized and unsubsidized loans, since um, the student is intending to take out their whole loan package from the federal government that's offered. You'll click on the estimate button and it will take us to the next page. So you can see here, the results show that to cover the estimated university bill, we would need to cover an additional $14,340 for the fall 2025 semester, or $28,396 for the whole year. And kind of how we arrived at that is basically the first two numbers listed under that fall semester, it splits it between the two semesters, are your big ticket items, so tuition and fees, the housing and the meal plan. And then kind of representing that $20,093 amount. And then we'll add on the additional expenses we put in there. So we have the 520 for books, and then the additional 2,000s to kind of bring it up to 25, 26 expense amounts, which gets us $21,353 for our total expenses. And then we subtract out that third amount listed, that anticipated financial aid. We're subtracting out that $7,012.50, which is basically the total of the student's financial aid in grants and scholarships and loans split evenly between the two semesters. That leaves us with the amount of that $14,350 that we need to cover the fall 2025 U-bill. So now that we've determined that we can borrow up to $28,075 until we hit our limits, and know that we need to cover at least $28,396 to cover the U-bill, it's time to apply for additional loans. I do want to note, in this case, since that student does have work study eligibility kind of taking up space on the aid offer, that's why we can't borrow that whole amount that would cover like the U-bill. In this case, we could maybe request that the work study eligibility amount be reduced or even removed if the student wasn't planning on working, which would give us that additional room to kind of take out that whole loan up to the cost of attendance limit. But yeah, the most common options to cover the remaining U-bill amounts are additional loans, which are usually either through a Parent Plus loan or a private student loan. So we're going to kind of talk about those additional loan options now. So one option is the Parent Plus loan. This is taken out solely in the parent's name from the Department of Education. It's not based on any financial need, but the student must file a FAFSA if you want to take out a Parent Plus loan. They will run a credit check on the parent who is the borrower for the account. The interest rate this year is a little bit under 9%. And then on top of that, the origination fee, which is going to be basically a 4% chunk taken out before it even applies to the U-bill. Then repayment can begin within 60 days, or you can defer repayment until 6 months after your student leaves school. This is one option, but with the higher interest rates, it's not as competitive with certain private lenders as they might be in the past. To apply for this, the parent would go to the studentaid.gov website, log in using their parent FSA ID or FAFSA ID and password. They would complete the Parent Plus Loan application on the studentaid.gov website, and then if their credit is approved, the parent must complete a master promissory note on the studentaid.gov website as well. This is basically a fancy term for a contract, basically you saying, I will pay back my Parent Plus loan. The other option would be private student loans. These are loans funded by an outside agency, such as a bank or just private lending company. In this case, the borrower can be the student or another party. If the loan is taken out in the student's name, typically because students are pretty young and don't have a long credit history, a co-signer will be required. So if your students are traditionally aged undergraduate student, it's likely they'll need a co-signer. It's not based on financial need, but a credit check is required of both the borrower and the co-signer. And the interest rate, origination fees, and repayment options all vary depending on your lender of choice. And so I can kind of open a window real quick and kind of give you an idea of how to search. So if you go to this web page here on our financial aid homepage, wait for it to load, of course. The most important thing on this page is probably the View Preferred Lender List button. If you click on this, select Undergraduate Loans, hit Proceed, and then finally View Loans. You'll get a list of kind of 7 quote unquote preferred lenders. All that means are these are the ones I can talk about as an advisor here in the financial aid office at Iowa State, but you are not limited to just these 7. As you can see, the interest rates vary quite a bit, anywhere from, let's see, I think the biggest range is 5% up to, or 3% up to 18% through College Avenue, or other lenders kind of have a bit more narrow band, so 3.2 to 8.7% for Iowa student loan education. So it kind of just shows some of the variations that exist within private loan lenders. So you would select a lender of your choice, follow the lender instructions on their website, and apply on their website. So this is done totally outside of Iowa State. One thing to keep in mind is if you are applying for a additional loan and you do it over the fall and spring semesters, the amounts will be split evenly between the 2 semesters. So say if you take out like either a private loan or Parent Plus loan for $20,000 for the fall and spring semesters this year, it'll get split. So it's 10,000 in the fall, 10,000 in the spring. And the main thing to know about private student loans is the application process can sometimes take up to 4 to 6 weeks to fully process, from you doing the application to the funds arriving at Iowa State and being ready to be applied to the university bill. So if you want to have it ready to go by that initial August 20th billing date, you probably need to apply, within this next week or so if you want it to be ready. All right, moving forward. Once you have applied for or you're planning on applying for it, you need to kind of think about paying your U-bill. So you can either cover the balance in full in August. So in that case, if you're taking out enough to cover the entire estimated university bill, you'll be covered. You don't need to do anything special with your U-bill. Or you can kind of use a 3-month deferred billing plan. So that would be if you're planning to cover some of the university bill amount out of pocket and some of it with loans. So let's say it would kind of split whatever's remaining into 1/3 payment in August, 1/3 payment in September, 1/3 payment in October. So let's say I've set it up so I have enough private loans to cover everything but $3,000 on the U-bill. I can maybe pay the $3,000 all in August, but if it's more convenient, I would get in touch with the Office of Accounts Receivable, get myself put on that deferred billing plan, and then I would just cover my 1,000 in August, 1,000 in September, and that final third of 1,000 in October to kind of get that U-bill covered. Sometimes it can make it more like approachable or more amenable for families if they're planning to pay some portion out of pocket. Additionally, you can use a college 529 plan as well. So just kind of consider all your options and work forward from there. So next, we are going to do a live example of completing a cost estimate using the financial aid offer. This example student is going to be a first-year student. They are an in-state student and they are a business major. So I am going to close out of this PowerPoint and kind of just share my desktop. So right now I'm going to go to the estimator and kind of just get it set up so we can kind of view everything on one page. So here's our example student's aid offer letter on the top left corner of the screen. We have our questions, their total COA we want to have answered, the additional loan eligibility, and then the amount we need to cover for the U-bill. So let's go into the expense estimator. So let's or actually real quick, let's look at our aid offer. So we can see from this one, their total cost of attendance is $25,802. So that's our financial aid limit for the student for the whole year. And we can see based on their financial aid offer that we have an additional $15,737 available in additional loan eligibility after we take into account their Pell Grant and their federal student loans that are available to them. All right. So like we said, this is an Iowa resident, full-time student, first-year student, and they are a business major. So we've kind of put that into the aid offer. Next, we're going to scroll down. Where are they living? Let's say they are in a suite style residence hall. So we'll click Eaton. They're in a double suite with air conditioning. And let's say they are on that Cardinal plan. On top of that, we need to put in additional expenses. So books is going to be $520 for the year. And then just because we're using this older expense estimator, I need to put in the cost difference. For an in-state student, like I said earlier, it's going to be about $1,000 a year. And for an out-of-state student, it's going to be $2,000. So now it's time to enter in their financial aid information. All right, so we can see they are receiving a federal Pell Grant amount of $4,565 for the school year. And then they're going to be taking out their entire loan offer in subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So we're going to hit estimate real quick and see what it gives us on this page. All right, so we can see that their estimated expense is going to be probably somewhere right around $12,500. And then they're receiving around $5,032 of financial aid per semester. So these two get added together, subtract it by the 5,000, and we can see that the subtotal is going to be $7,406. So if we wanted to cover the university bill, we would need to take out a loan for up to $7,406 to kind of get everything covered for the semester, or for the whole year, probably right around, $15,000 would be a safe amount to take out as a loan. One thing I did want to mention was in the case, and this might come up in the future if your student's living off campus, how it works. So let's say they have no residence hall, no meal plan. We still have the books for the additional $520. What would happen in this case? So we can see in this case that their subtotal is only going to be $900 because it's a bit less because they don't have to cover, the meal plan or the housing. It's just tuition and fees and the books. If you were to take out like a loan amount of say you're taking out a $6,000 loan, that would more than cover the remaining amount, and you'd have around $5,000 left over. If that's the case, you can get it refunded back to you as long as the student sets up their refunds in Workday, and they could use that refund to help cover any off-campus housing expenses. So that's always kind of an option, is that any financial aid you have that is more than your U-bill amount can get refunded back to you, and you can use that to cover any off-campus expenses. All right, so we're going to go back into the presentation. Just kind of got caught back up to where we were. All right, so that's kind of the live example. So hopefully if you need to do it yourself, you'll feel confident doing so. Additionally, I do want to say there are some additional kind of ways to get funding if you are a student pursuing a teaching career or major through what's known as the Federal Teach Grant Program. I just want to talk about this briefly just so you're aware of it. As a highly qualified teacher, you must agree to meet state certification requirements and teach for at least 4 years out of 8 calendar years at at a school that has low income and in a high need field. Basically, what that means for low income schools would mean that 30% or more of the students apply for free or reduced price lunch, or it's on an Indian reservation. In this case, over 1,200 schools in Iowa apply. And then high need fields at either the federal or state level are such as math, science, foreign language, music education, language arts, kind of whatever would apply to you in this situation. Um, what can you get if you're a part of the Teach Grant program? Students can receive up to basically another $3,700 for the school year, which would be split between the 2 semesters, and can receive up to $16,000 during their undergraduate career. It's going to kind of be prorated based off their program of study, but basically, if you're a full-time student, you're going to be getting right around $1,800 per semester if you are participating in the Teach Grant. To qualify for the Teach Grant, a student must file a FAFSA, declare a major in a high subject need area or high need subject area, and have either an ACT score above the 75th percentile or have a 3.25 cumulative GPA and maintain that for each semester. So we'll consider high school GPA for first year students, transfer GPA for transfer students, and then once they've kind of had a whole year at Iowa State, or I think semester, it'll be based off of their ISU GPA. If you're interested in pursuing the Teach Grant, you'll have to set up a meeting with our Teach Grant advisor, Eric Baldwin. Basically 20 minutes of your time could equal up to $16,000 over 4 years at Iowa State. You'll want to schedule an appointment this summer through Navigate or by calling our office. You can meet Eric in person or virtually. And if you have any questions, you can always contact him at 515-294-7864, or probably better yet at email etb1@iastate.edu. All right. So now that we are wrapping up our presentation, just as a final reminder, please review or have your student log into Workday and review their My Tasks inbox, which you can kind of see an example of. It's that little inbox looking or envelope looking icon in the top right corner of Workday. Click on that to see if there are any tasks that need to be completed, such as authorizing the release of any financial aid, complete your master promissory note, or entrance counseling if you're taking out loans, and make sure to accept any loans in Workday. And then finally, complete any FAFSA verification or financial aid tasks in Workday if selected. If these aren't taken care of, they can kind of hold up aid and cause delays on all your financial aid going out. All right. So that is our presentation. You can contact us at our Office of Student Financial Aid at 515-294-2223. Or if you have any specific questions, you can always email me at jschreit@iastate.edu. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. All right. Well, that is our presentation for today. Um, Unfortunately, I'm not sure how to get the chat working for questions. So yeah, please send me an email and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. All right. Thank you very much and have a nice day.